So he maintains ModWhiskey, the ModWhiskey library. He's an unbelievably smart person. He wrote a long 7-part blog series about how decorators really work, because for a while everyone was writing, this is how decorators work, blog posts, and there was inaccuracies, they didn't understand things. One of the things that Graham Dumbleton says, if you're writing decorators, using functools.wrap is actually, you lose a lot of introspection as well as some of the things you need for error management. Wrapped handles all of that really, really well. It's WRAPT, you can download it from the Python package index. And if you get a chance, I should have linked to it from here, you should find that blog series and read it. It's heavy reading. Graham is like way up there and he doesn't tone it down. So it's not beginner friendly. I get lost in there. But anyway, this code sample is extracted from this right there. So I took out all the comments to make it fit. I usually heavily comment my code. And then the way, for example, this hook decorator, way back here, this on the forward line, at webhook and that stuff, the way I take this, the base hook, and turn it into that webhook is I use partials. Up here again. So I'll explain what partials are in a little bit. And this actually should say webhook, I apologize. So pretend there's a WEB. Who here knows what partials are? Okay. Yeah, I'll explain that actually I'll go over it really quick right now. Partials are a fancy way of saying, I want to take this base hook function and provide an intelligent default, or provide a default value from one of the arguments. In this case, the hash function that generates the individual hash, I use the basic webhooks hash function that I include, which is just a UUID. But otherwise, I still have to define the sender callable on this hook. That's all partials do. And you'll see how it works in a little bit. There we go. Next. Oh yeah, I didn't explain it here. That's where it was. I didn't see it on my slides. So yeah, the nice thing about using partials for this, for API design, is it makes it really easy to create more hooks. Let's say, for example, you don't want people to have to define the sender callable for every time they write at hook, for their decorator. You just want them to do at hook, right? Or at pandas hook, or at haystack hook. Let's say if you're doing something that's involving search or geo. The nice thing about it is you can use partials to define that, hey, we want to use our geo or pandas callable, and then that person, all they have to do is at the top of their payload functions, they just assign, whatever hook that you've created using a partial. And I actually wrote a blog article about partials. Is it okay?
Yeah, it's just sort of flashing a little bit.
Okay. Oh, I see it. Yeah. So I wrote an article about partials, which I hope explains it a little bit better than what I did here. So in the case of, I didn't name those things differently. In the case of DJ Webhooks, which is the Django extension to Webhooks, it's a separate package, so that way I could isolate out the things that were Django. I'm really sorry. This should say ORM hook, and this should say Redis log hook, but just pretend this says ORM hook and this says Redis log hook. So here I take the base callable, or the base hook, I'm using a partial, and then I define the sender callable equals the ORM callable, which is purely ORM, even the logging of what happens with the hook, like how it proceeds through the stack, as well as the base hash function. And then here, the ORM, or the Redis log hook, which uses the ORM and Redis to store the history of what happens to a particular webhook. That's using the Redis log. Oh, that should be, wow, this is like awful, Bears. I'm so sorry. This uses a Redis log underscore callable. I really apologize for that. That's its sender callable. As you can see, the nice thing about it is the end result for the user, for the developer who's trying to build an application that uses this a lot, all of this is encapsulated in just a few short places, so I kind of like that approach. And API design is really important to get people to use your library, even if I did mess up this slide a lot. So, yeah, that's So this is how a sender callable is written. There is a senderable object that Webhooks provides, and I'll go into that. And actually, let me start over. So the sender callable accepts, the wrapped, which is above the shaded stuff, is the name of the function, the payload function that's being passed in, and then you have a whole bunch of arguments. But then it's the sender object that passes in that handles the sending of data. And I'll go into why I did it this way. And you can see I instantiate it here. I can add extra values to the sender object, and then finally, once the sender object's ready to go, I actually send off the request. And then the senderable class, there's a whole bunch of stuff in here. Gonna jump up here again. There's some cached properties, just because sometimes figuring out what the target URL is, the payload, and then if you have a giant payload, JSONifying that can take a while. So I cache that in case it's hit more than once. And then these are the various action methods. So URL is calls get URL, payload calls get payload. So it's just a nice little bit of abstraction. So yeah, and then of course the sender method. So that's basically what's in the senderable class. And what the senderable class does, I know I'm going kind of deep. It serializes the data, it makes all the attempts against the target, and it records a response. That's all it does. And so the way it's come out right now is the sender callable is a function. We can include it in a partial function. It's kind of nice, but it's not extendable. It's something I'm trying to figure out how to make more elegant. The senderable class, though, well, the rest of it is entirely functional, and it's based on functional programming. The senderable class, it's really extendable. So that's just how sometimes things work out, even if you're trying to stay functional. And then I'll give you an example. So this is in the DJ webhooks, this is a sender callable, going back really fast. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines of code with the base webhooks implementation. And then this is the truncated part 1 of the truncated Django one. There's actually a lot more stuff going on. I just took out as much as I could to make it fit into slides. The senderable object is something I wrote called Django senderable, which I'll show in a minute. And then here's some more logic in the sender callable. So I can't really extend this function. It's just one giant. Well, I mean, it's like 40 lines of code, but to me that's too big of a function. Be small and better. So I'm working on them, trying to refactor it. On the other hand, the Django senderable object, this is the notify method. This is the only thing that the Django senderable overrides from the base webhook senderable object, is just how we record what's happening. And this is just saving it to the delivery model, which is where our delivery log. And so the lesson learned is sometimes, I know functional program is what's cool and hip right now, but sometimes object-oriented code just works out better for this stuff. And yeah, the senderable class for this, that it's doing exactly what's happening with the standard base webhooks. It's just storing the results in the ORM. Okay, so yeah, and so I'm just summarizing again. Okay, so sorry about that. That's okay. So to go through really quick what's happening in Django when we call this. Let's say Audrey is sending a message, sending from her system to my system, a webhook. So in Django, because I'm hitting the database to find what webhook was created by Audrey, the developer, I specify the action that she's committing, and then I also have to pass in, well, this is the object, the data that she's passing in. She also has to pass in the owner, which is herself, as well as an identifier. And these three things together, event, owner, and identifier, those are the things that identify which target it goes to, because we need to have developers be able to add this through the Django admin or through maybe some views that they create. And then here's a payload that's truncated for space. And as you can see, I have a comment. I don't know if you can see them back. Add more logic as needed, because sometimes it takes a while to assemble this stuff. So that's kind of how it works. And right now, it's working really, really well. I'm really pleased with the end results. The sender callable, I need to tweak it and improve it so I can move this project move DJ Webhooks out of alpha, or move webhooks and DJ Webhooks out of alpha. And I don't know if I explained it well, because this is the first time I've tried to verbalize except for to Audrey. And she sometimes says, can you explain that better? But the end result, and I'm working on improving the documentation, the end result for writing sender callables and senderables, as well as for people who are working with using the final implementation, the decorators, is really elegant. It's really nice. Like I said, I need to really get the documentation down. Usually I'm good at it, but this is kind of tricky because remember how I said with webhooks the terminology is difficult? Because is webhook a push or pull? Are we dealing with callables? When I say callable in a function, that's not the same thing what's said on Wikipedia. So it gets confusing really quick, and that's part of the documentation issue. I'm working on it. One of the things that's come up though is, because I have it working, I've got it tested, but one of the things that's come up with is, what if generating the payload and sending it takes forever? How do you handle that? And so, do I have that? Oh yeah, and so the answer to this, thank you, is how to make it run really fast is use an asynchronous task or job queue. You don't make the person wait while you generate the data, you send the data, and you log what happens during that whole process. And this is how it works. This is the same code which is on the other side. And in this case I'm using Django Redis queue, but if you're using just plain webhooks, you can use Celery or Redis queue, which is another library. Most of these things have a job or a task decorator, and then you just delay it, either to 0 seconds or however your particular queue works. And what's nice about this is because I've already forced you to write these payload functions and decorate them with these hooks, and you can then wrap those in task queue decorators. It's just a nice little pattern, and it's not a huge number of nested decorators. I don't know if anyone's run into decorator hell, but
yes.
Excuse my language. But yeah, I think this is pretty light. And then testing. How did I test this? And I tried to stick with unit tests. I hate getting religious about unit tests, and I'm sure people take exception to this, and I know it's really important sometimes to really isolate stuff, but with something like this where you're hitting things off in the distance, if you spend all your time mocking up fake requests, what I found is that then while your unit tests work, if you don't write functional tests to work with that other system, and then that other system changes just a little bit, your tests will pass, but your code in production will break. So that's been my experience with that. Okay, so how am I doing on time?
It's about 8.
Oh, it's about 8. Okay. So takeaways, what I got out of this. So one is small library support. Django, Flask, Bottle, Pyramid, Zope, I'm sure Tornado has one. All the frameworks, I bet you Pandas has one. All the frameworks have a cache property decorator, where you can take a property that you have defined on the class, and you import your cache property decorator. Instead of putting @property on your method, you put in cache property. Everything has it, but if you're just doing pure Python, you're copy pasting from one project to another, this like 15 lines of code, and I just wrapped it up into a library. And then this Croatian guy named Tin Turkovic, and it's funny, we were in Zagreb last year for a month and we didn't meet him, but he helped me with threading support. So it now supports threads, because the normal cache property decorator in Django bottle flask doesn't handle threads at all. Like if there's any lag in time between like more than a millisecond or two, you don't have a working cache. You have something you think is working. So that's one thing. Another thing is Django has, and a number of other frameworks have JSON decoders to handle if you want to serialize data from Django, from a dictionary to with date times and decimals, it'll serialize it. But when I copy pasted that into webhooks, and Audrey's like, oh, let me, you don't have any tests on that, let me take a look at it. And then she realized that it wasn't really compliant with the formal specifications, and it wasn't really tested that well in Django. It works as well as we think it does. So she broke it out into something called standard JSON, which follows the ECMA 262 and 404 specifications. And that's supposed to be really good. So thank you, Audrey. I appreciate that. And it's really well tested. She broke it out into small testable, unit testable components. This is a perfect use case for unit tests, as is cache properties. So I'm not copy pasting code from project to project. Another takeaway I got out of this is, as you get into functional code, or you're doing fun things with lists and arrays and functions, or making sure everything's encapsulated in that function. That's awesome. But too much of a good thing can be bad. And one of the things I found is, as much as I tried to get the senderable function to work, I couldn't get it to work without passing in like 15 arguments or just a giant query, right? One big dictionary, which we did in my old Java days, and I hated that. So I went back to an object-oriented system, and it works really well. So the takeaway is, don't get religious about programming paradigms if you're working in Django. Don't use classes unless you need to, and don't try to stay away from classes. Just let it happen. So the result is, I think it's pretty good. I'm actually really pleased with what I got out of this, or what I wrote. The documentation, both the comments internally and the external usage documentation, I need to update, and because it's been evolving. Every time I have a point release, there's changes in it. So I haven't kept up with the documentation. But when I finally this week integrated this work into this internal project Audrey and I have, it was really fast. It was really easy. And granted, I'm the author, so I think, oh, it's really easy. I think this is good. I think it's simple. If I'm writing more of these payload functions, they're going to be easy. All I have to do is decorate them with, at hook, and it just works. And behind the scenes, it's pretty simple, and I can extend it to suit our business needs. And so yeah, that's kind of it. So that's it. So any questions? Yes, sir, Chris.
Have you added any support for like message digest or message signing or anything like that?
You mean like the hash?
Yeah, kind of like the hash. Yeah.
Can you be? I mean, is that the answer?
Or some sort of authentication?
No, I haven't. I've tried to keep it as bare bones, as simple as possible. My hope is that one of my goals of this, again, was to keep it as simple as possible, that if you wanted to add that, you could, and then hopefully we could integrate that into the library. Just for my needs so far, I haven't needed that, but I can absolutely see a need for that. Okay. Yes, sir.
So you have error checking, or you expect to have errors.
Yes.
Is that correct? So why wouldn't you go over TCP if you're expecting the service to fail? If we get a fail, we keep logging, we keep requesting. Why not go for something UDP based?
Well, for start, I mean, it depends on your needs. Sometimes you need to have that handshake, right? Okay. Because for using GitHub as an example, if I write a webhook and I try to connect to it from GitHub, right, if I can't see, oh, this succeeded, this failed, it's right, much harder to debug. Whereas UDP, the nice thing about UDP is you don't care if there's a response.
Exactly right.
The bad thing about UDP is
You don't
there's
get
no
a response.
response.